everyone. Welcome back to the GamecockScoop.com podcast, the official podcast of GamecockScoop.com on Rivals. I'm Caleb, as always, joined by Alan. We took a week off, summer break, whatever. It was also the weekend before was kind of the dead weekend for official visits, although we'll get into a very productive weekend that happened this past weekend for the Gamecocks on that front. Also, if you haven't checked out GamecockScoop.com lately, we got a little bit of a facelift on Monday. And now I think all the kinks are worked out too. I know there was a couple of troubleshooting things we had to do on Monday after it rolled out. If you use dark mode, the forum was reading weird and stuff, but I think all of that is fixed now. What was it, Tuesday? Your story took a little while to post, but I think, we're all good now. So go check out our facelift on GamecockScoop.com. That's also where you'll find my weekly recruiting wrap-up tomorrow, which will have even more in-depth information on the June recruiting cycle, on maybe some guys that are uncommitted that still South Carolina very much leads for, I think, and then maybe one or two guys that South Carolina currently has committed that they're going to need to be looking over their shoulder, I guess, throughout the rest of the summer for some other schools that have gotten involved and gotten involved in a major way on that. Since we last spoke, though, there have been quite a few new commitments. I know that everyone is chomping at the bit to talk about the long snapper, Kyler Farrow. Actually, though, I mean, there was some feedback on the board that was kind of like, what, a long snapper? The long snapper that South Carolina currently has, do you know his name?
Was Cole Rasmussen long snapping last year?
I can't remember the name right now. All I know is he's been there for 5 years and he's done a good job. The reason he's done a good job is we've never talked about him, right? Like, that's the whole point of long snapping is no one really notices it unless things go horribly wrong. Looking at you, Michigan, although that was more.
Oh, yeah. Trouble with the snap. Yep.
Anyway, so
Hunter Rogers.
Hunter Rogers, yeah.
He scored a touchdown in the Gator Bowl.
Man, how did we forget that? But yeah, so assuming that this is going to continue that stability beyond this year for another 4 or 5 years, then, not a bad decision there. But obviously that's not going to help your ranking at all because it's we don't rank long snappers on Rivals. Also in that time, you signed another kicker, Max Kelly. That would be your second scholarship kicker in the past 2 years. That one we do have some stats on. Cole's Kicking has him ranked in the top 10 kickers for this past year. I have the exact thing if I can pull up the article real quick. But overall, you've had, what is it now, 12 commitments in the last 3 weeks?
3 weeks. Yeah, it was 11 in 3 weeks. You went from 6 verbal commits in your class, some ones that, signed early, signed in the spring, or not signed, but committed in the spring. And then you've had these 3 weekends with kids on campus and visitors, as you mentioned earlier, and you've almost tripled your class size from then. You've gone from 6 to 17.
Yeah. So, and by the way, the official number on the Cole's Kicking, he's ranked as the number 11 kicker in the country. So again, you don't necessarily know how that's all going to shape up after this coming season. So good to have another talented leg on campus for that. I think the last one we talked about on here was Preston Douglas. So let me run down the other commits we've had in the meantime. You have 3-star in-state O-lineman Shedrick Surratt, who committed on the 14th. And then on the same day, you had 3-star linebacker AJ Holloway from Buford, Georgia. Like I said, you had Max Kelly, the kicker. You had kind of a surprising one, 4-star Jaquavius Dodd on the 20th. That's a Taylor, South Carolina guy. Some people on the site were like, he's 4 stars, but doesn't seem to have a ton of commitments. He definitely has elevated his profile in the last few months. So that'll be another one you have to kind of watch to see who gets involved throughout his senior season. But the fact that he's an in-state kid The fact that South Carolina was in on him early, I like holding on to him. You got the long snapper. And then this all happened, this whole saga happened, I guess, since we last spoke on the podcast. But if you kept up with my weekly recruiting wrap ups, you saw it all play out. But um, earlier in the process, obviously, South Carolina had Ryan Montgomery as their top quarterback prospect. He ultimately ended up going with Georgia. We weren't sure if they were going to end up extending an offer to anyone else in the 2025 class. But they had been kind of keeping tabs on Cutter Woods out of my neck of the woods where I grew up, West Side in Anderson, South Carolina. I grew up down the road and went to Palmetto. But anyway, so he camped, or he did a 7-on-7 at South Carolina 2 Thursdays ago. I think it was exactly 2 weeks ago today. And they won his team won the whole 7-on-7. And also, I think the whole staff was kind of very closely watching to decide if they were going to extend an offer or not. Dowell Loggins, obviously the offensive coordinator, makes that decision. And ultimately, they did extend that offer. Cutter Woods then took an official visit a week later this past weekend. And then earlier this week on the 24th, so was that Monday, made his commitment. So what are you getting, I guess, with Cutter Woods? We were talking about this a little bit before we went live. I don't think some might compare this to like the Lenore Sellers situation where you go after the in-state 3-star guy, a little bit late in the process, get him to flip. I can see some of that, and I do think the fact that he has led his team to a state championship and is a proven winner, I guess, does really weigh heavy here. They're definitely different players. He's more of a pro style guy, although he does have some rushing stats. I think he had like 300 or 400 yards rushing this past season and a few touchdowns, and same as sophomore year. To me, this is one of those guys that it never hurts to take a chance on, right? Like, I do think he's probably the best quarterback in the state. Maybe Will Wilson, who's at NC State, or who committed to NC State. So he's, one of the best 1 or 2 quarterbacks in the state. Obviously coveted the South Carolina offer, pretty quickly flipped once that offer was made official. So if you're going to take a chance on someone that has some upside, take it on the competitor with moxie that wants to be there. Not that I'm making a direct comparison because I think their games are very different, but Connor Shaw was a 3-star too, right? Like, it does sometimes work out. And I think there's a lot of it that makes sense as far as just adding.
You heard it here first. Cutter Woods will never lose a game at Williams-Brice Stadium.
Yeah, there you go. That's all I'm saying. But I'm just saying it's good to have that sort of attitude in the locker room, regardless of whether or not he ever takes a snap or not. And I do think he has the upside to potentially work his way into an eventual starter, but he's got a lot to go ahead of him before that. And then the last one is 3-star linebacker Tayshawn Alston. He'll probably be like a outside linebacker, could put his hand down in the dirt some. He's got some length on him at 6'4", 215. I actually think he's a little heavier than that now. But yeah, so should play a factor eventually in the pass rush game. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this class in general, though. So currently they're ranked 30th in the Rivals team recruiting rank. Last year's class finished 31st, but it was a very small class. The average star ranking for last year's class was much higher than this year's class. So right now you only have 2 4-stars, and they're both defensive ends. You got Anthony Addison and you got Jaquavius Dodd. I do think before the process is over, they'll land another couple of 4-stars. I think you're still in good position with Jalen Gilchrist, who's a 4-star. I think it'll be interesting to see how it plays out with Bryce Davis, who's a 4-star. And I also think it's possible that some of these 3-stars on your roster, on your commitment list now, could move up before the process is over. Think about like a Shamari Earls, who's a 3-star, but just got an offer from Georgia. Are you going to be able to hold on to him now that you got an offer from Georgia? I don't know, but that's one that definitely could move up eventually. Thinking about like a DeMarcus Leach, who got an offer from Michigan, 3-star, could move up. Caleb Williams is getting some push from some other schools as well. So anyway, it wouldn't surprise me if there are a few more 4-stars before this is over. But looking back all the way till 2004 on the Rivals ranking, this will be the first full class, because I don't want to count last year and I don't want to count 2021, which was, obviously a transition year and pretty weird. But the first full class ranked lower than 26th in the country. That happened a couple of times since 2004. And 2004 ended up ranked 35th in the country with 29 total commitments. And what you really got to hope is that some of the evaluation that the staff is doing is just going under the radar. And that's kind of what happened with this class, the 2004 class. So if you've been following South Carolina football for as long as I have, some of these names will sound familiar. If you haven't, just bear with me for a second. But you got a 3-star Sidney Rice in that class. That turned out pretty okay. You have a 2-star Chris Hampton in that class. That turned out okay for him. 2-star Co Simpson in that class. These are all guys that played at least a little bit in the NFL. You have a 2-star Jordan Lindsay in that class. And there was another name. A 3-star Jonathan Joseph in that class, which obviously he had the longest NFL career of all of them. So basically what I'm saying is you got to hope that the staff knows better than the Rivals rankings. And again, like we'll reassess this again next year whenever the Rivals rankings are finalized, because when someone like Pharaoh Cooper was offered, he was a 2-star, ended up a 4-star by the time all things were said and done. When someone like Nick Imamori was offered, he didn't even have a ranking yet. He ended up as a 4-star before all was said and done. So I do still think there's some movement that's going to happen in the rankings. Maybe you finish in the top 25 after all. But I understand why people are a little afraid currently. So why do you think, let's say that the rankings are all completely accurate, whatever, and they end up outside of the top 25 in high school recruiting, even with a relatively full class. Why do you think we're seeing this lull in recruiting from this part of the Beamer era? Because up to this point, I think we've seen kind of a steady trajectory in the right direction. Even if the 2024 class ended up in team ranking not that high, I think most people would consider that a successful class. Lots of 4-stars, a 5-star in Dylan Stewart. I don't think you're seeing that level of upside in this class.
Yeah, I think as with anything like this, you're kind of taking it from a few different angles, a few different things. I think first and foremost, I think the general talent in the state of South Carolina this year isn't as high as it was at least last year for sure, where you had 3, 4-star, high 4-star offensive linemen in state. Obviously, you got all 3 of them come to campus. I think obviously, the talent in your own state plays into it. I think there was an element last year too where you had a guy like Dante Reno, who was kind of a linchpin of a class, who signed really, really early and stayed with it all the way through. We talked a lot last fall about him kind of recruiting other recruits, kind of being a guy like that. You didn't have anyone in this class sign as early as he did. So I think there's a certain element too of that. And then if you really want to just get to it, I don't think one 5-7 season necessarily takes you off of it or like knocks you off a cliff or anything like that, but it does play a factor. I think there's an element of the coaching changes too. You flipped quite a bit of your staff this offseason, assistance wise. That's what's doing a lot of the recruiting. And I think there's more questions here than maybe there has been at any point in the Beamer era, besides before his first year, obviously, when you were kind of flying blind. But I think there's fair questions. Maybe this is how we get into talking a little more about the schedule and previewing that. But I think there's fair questions about, the saying is like a second 5-7 season or a second whatever disappointing season is infinitely worse than the first one, because the first one could be an outlier. That's kind of, I think, where you are now, where it's not a problem yet, but you're starting to wonder if it is a problem.
Yeah, I think those elements that you mentioned definitely are all playing a contributing factor, but it does feel like this is a crucial point in the Beamer era this upcoming season. And unfortunately, you probably have the most difficult schedule thus far in the Beamer era at the same time. I do think there are reasons to be optimistic about this roster. I've said several times already through this offseason that I think he's going to have the best defense, especially talent wise, that he's had since he's been here. Defense goes a long way, especially if you pair it with an offense with an upside that we think one led by Lenore Sellers does have. But yeah, so it does. I do think if you want the 2026 recruiting class to kind of flip back in the other direction, you're going to have a good season this coming season. And also the 2025 class, and this is, going to be the case going forward. When I was looking back through 2004 to 2025, some of those high school recruiting classes had 30, 31, 32 high school recruits in it. You're not going to see that ever again. So I think a big portion of whether or not this recruiting cycle is successful or not is going to come down to your JUCO recruiting and your transfer portal recruiting. And it's a double-edged sword, but I think if you exceed expectations during the football season this season, bring back the right pieces heading into next season, you have a lot more to sell next year, this coming year's portal class in the offseason. And that could really swing the way that we feel about this 2025 class, and gives some of these 3-star guys that we're talking about a little bit more time to develop, if you can kind of pair it with a good portal class.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the main thing too, as we were talking about before we got on here, that in modern college football, I mean, they only signed 16 last year. Really was 15 out of high school because one of those was a JUCO guy, Jerome Simmons. But you're not signing a 30-person class anymore, like you said. And with this class, you're at 17 verbal commits now. It's obviously June. You're a little inside 6 months, still early signing day. Things are going to change, but I don't think you're adding a ton more to this. I think you're just kind of finishing out at this point, assuming you actually land all the guys you have verbal commits for now. So I think you're about, I don't want to say done, because I don't think it's going to end at 17, but you're closing in on kind of where this class is going to look like, or what it's going to look like when you actually do get to the finish line.
No, yeah, we were kind of counting on our fingers beforehand. To me, I think high school recruits, we can include JUCO too, because that usually shows up on the same list. High school and JUCO, you probably end up somewhere around 22, 23 guys before it's all said and done, and then you'll fill out the rest in the portal. But yeah, let's get into how this season is going to take place. So if you missed it, we've been kind of breaking down the 2024 schedule piece by piece. You can go back. I believe it was like 3 episodes ago was the last time we did one of these, when we broke down Akron with Perry McCarty. But yeah, thus far we've broken down Old Dominion, which of course is the opener, broken down Kentucky, which is week 2. We've broken down LSU, which is week 3, and we've broken down Akron. Then you get a bye week, and that's nice because you're going to need it. Because after the bye week, the October stretch is pretty brutal. We'll start talking today about Ole Miss, which is the first game in that stretch. That's a home game. It's the one game that we don't really know what the time could be. It's flex scheduled. So it'll kind of depend on how the teams handle their first 4 or 5 weeks. Then you have to go to Alabama, to Oklahoma before you get your second bye week. There's 2 bye weeks this season. So right now we'll just talk about Ole Miss, but the next couple of weeks we'll talk about Alabama and Oklahoma too. But this is undoubtedly the toughest stretch of the schedule. I think you can safely go 0-3 here and still accomplish all of your goals. But it just feels like a gut punch. And if you could win one, I think one of the 3, I think you feel pretty good about it. Let's start with Ole Miss. So that's going to be a home game. Depending on how things shake out up to that point, it could be a national profile game. And Ole Miss is expected to be pretty good. As I was starting to look into What they're bringing back, the answer is pretty much everyone outside of their running back Quinshon Judkins, who is at Ohio State now. They're bringing back their quarterback Jackson Dark. They're bringing back their top 3 receivers. They added some pretty big names in the portal, including Antoine Wells Jr. So four four pretty elite receivers. Their defensive line was probably one of their weaker points last season, as we saw when they kind of went up against any other smash mouth sort of team. Georgia blew them out. But they brought in Walter Nolan, former 5-star out of Texas A&M. They brought in, we tried to say this earlier and I got it wrong, I think, but Princely Umanmielen out of Florida, who was all SEC last year and had 7 sacks for Florida. They also brought in former Alabama cornerback Trey Amos and Arkansas linebacker Chris Paul. All of those guys were on the top 50 or so of Rivals Portals rankings, and Ole Miss landed them all, including Wells as well. So I don't know. I think the Kiffin could obviously Kiffin this somehow, but this seems like Ole Miss's best chance, maybe ever, to make the playoff, make a run, maybe even compete for the league.
It is. I would agree with everything you just said there. I think in a 12-team playoff, in a world where you can go 10-2 and make the playoff, that absolutely could happen. I think the offense almost speaks for itself. I think you maybe see a little bit of a style change just because you're losing one of the best running backs in the country and you're adding, well, not adding, but you're getting your quarterback back, the 3 receivers. If Wells is healthy, you're probably looking at more of a kind of spread passing game here for Ole Miss this year, just speaking from the outside at least. I think the question, like if you're South Carolina and you try to like piece together, because I think just because it's a home game, this is probably the one of the 3 you feel like you have the best shot at least, right, in October, just because it's at home and it's not Alabama, and I don't know what Oklahoma is going to be yet, but I think that's most people would probably say that. How do you piece together a path to winning this game? I think it kind of goes to what we talked about when we did the LSU segment a couple episodes back, where you just kind of got to turn into a shootout, expect the fact that you're going to give up some points, give up some plays through the air. You got to just kind of score early, score often, make it look, maybe not to this extreme, look like that 22 Tennessee game. Am I wrong? Like, that feels like the way you're going to do this if you do it, right? Like,
I definitely feel like you got to come out swinging. Outside of Alabama, who held Ole Miss to 10 points, and Georgia, who held Ole Miss to 17 points. I mean, I guess Mississippi State technically did too, but they lost that game. Most of the teams that actually competed with them or beat them last year were able to put up a good amount of points and kind of keep running with it. And I don't think that South Carolina, even though I think that this is going to be an improved defense, I don't think that you can compare them to last year's Alabama or Georgia in any sort of way. So I do think you probably need some turnovers. One thing that Ole Miss struggled with a little bit last year was their offensive line. So can you put some pressure on Jackson Dart, make some mistakes happen? But yeah, this definitely feels like at a minimum, this is going to be a 30-plus point ball game with some turnovers if you're going to come out of this one alive.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much the only way you can do it is you're going to have to, again, score early, score often, catch a couple breaks. Maybe you feel good about the line of scrimmage, at least on that side. Ole Miss did portal 3 offensive linemen, so they're maybe short that part of it up too. But you like your defensive tackles. You like your ability to put some pressure on, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see how the first few weeks go. But I'm expecting in general the pass rush to be a little bit better. I think you like your linebacker group too. If you do end up having to blitz a little, I think you are happy that Jenkins is no longer there. So at the very least, I mean, I think Ole Miss will still be able to run the ball this year, but they won't be quite as balanced, ideally, as they were last year. So maybe you can kind of pin your ears back a little bit more. I certainly think at this point, June 27th, I'd be picking South Carolina to lose this game. But if I'm trying to render a path for a best case scenario, uh, sure, yeah, you need to get a pass rush. So yes, if they're going to win it, I think that's a factor.
That's about all I had on Ole Miss. Should we run through some baseball names here?
Yeah. So last time we talked about the addition of Paul Manieri. Um, we have a lot of good resources from his opening press conference and stories and stuff that Alan has written since then. But there's also already been some movement on the recruiting trail and in the portal. What do you got for me on what has changed about the baseball roster at this point?
Yeah, I'm just going to run through the names here, and we can just go from there on it. I'm pulling it up now. Some of these names are JUCOs who either committed during the Mark Kingston era, just have kept that, or like last year, or they've been signed for a while and are just sticking with Manieri even through the staff change. But right now for the transfer portal, once you update it through today, which we'll talk about that in a second. From D1 schools, you have Dalton Mashore, who's a center fielder from St. Mary's, who I think is probably the highest rated of this class, double-digit home run guy out west. Caleb Jones, who was a reliever at Winthrop. Ashton Crowther, reliever at Miami. Wyatt Evans from Tennessee is also a left-handed reliever who didn't pitch last year, I believe, with injury, but there's some people, there might be some upside there. Nathan Hall crossing the bridge from Clemson. He didn't play much there this year. I don't know if that's just taking a flyer or maybe some depth. And then from the JUCO ranks, and we'll cut back to the last couple of days, Caden Gaskin, who I actually talked to on the phone, wrote a quick story about him a couple weeks ago. If you're subscribed, you can check out. He's an infielder. Jace Woyota, I don't know how you say his name, third baseman with some power from JUCO. 3 JUCO pitchers, Jackson Susie, Brandon Stone, Brandon Clark, all rated pretty highly by JUCO experts. And then yesterday, you land Jarvis Evans from Georgia in the portal. Wasn't a weekend guy there, but he was pitching on weekends. Like, wasn't a starter, but he was a reliever. Walks were a problem, but he also had a ton of strikeouts, so I'm interested in that. And then just today, like an hour ago, Charlie Meglio from Campbell. He's a shortstop / third baseman. Hit 275 last year. Was an all freshman in the CAA. So that's where you are now. A lot of JUCOs, a lot of kind of bets on that. I'm definitely going to interested in that. Going to write some about that. An interesting Power 5 arm, SEC arm, and Evans. And then a West Coast outfielder who seems to have some power from a smaller school. But I don't know. I'm very interested in this class. Do you have anything sticks out to you about that?
Remind me of the Clemson name again?
Nathan Hall.
Nathan Hall. The one thing I have heard there is there was the connection with Monty Lee from his time at Clemson. He recruited him when he was in high school. Still believes in the talent, I guess, even though he hasn't shown it yet at the college level. So that was the connection there. I still think, well, this team's just going to have to look different, right? Cole Messina, who just won the Johnny Bench Award, by the way. Yeah. Congrats to him. But your biggest bat is leaving, or second biggest bat, depending on how you rank him and Petrie. And I don't think thus far you've found that replacement, unless maybe a freshman comes along or something that we're not anticipating. I don't think that there's very many guys in the portal that are going to be able to replace that production, but I don't know. I still feel like you're looking for a little more power somewhere.
Yeah, I agree.
Forward, but...
No, I'm with you. I don't think you're finding a guy who hit 20 homers last year and was one of the best catchers in the country. I don't think the best by the award, at least. I don't think you're finding that. I think you're trying to maybe piece it together a little bit, kind of an aggregate. Mashore's got some power. If you believe the Monty Lee scouting report, Nathan Hall could have some power. Both those JUCO guys you got had some power at that level. You see how that translates. And the guy you got from Campbell today hit 9 homers there. And not a terrible conference, CAA. So I think you can piece it together maybe, but I don't think you're finding a Cole Messina replacement.
All right, I got one more football question for you.
Yep.
And I'm putting you on the spot, so just do your best. But Earlier this week, Athlon released all of their preseason All SEC teams. I guess it was last week, actually. South Carolina had 6 players on it. So you got 3 defensive players. You got Tonka Hemingway, Debo Williams, and Nick Imamori. And then on offense, you have running back Raheem Sanders and offensive lineman Vershawn Lee, and then punter Kai Kroger. I feel fine about those 6 names. We can argue about if someone got snubbed or should have been on second team when they're on third team, whatever. But my question is, other than those 6 names, who is a name that you think this season could end up on an All SEC list at the end of the season that didn't make it on this preseason list?
It's a good question. I'm going to say Jalen Kilgore. I think he might actually be the most talented person on that defense, period. If not, he's pretty close. I think having a year under his belt's going to be really good for him. He's not going to be thrown into the fire week 1 off the bench like he was last year. Physical, flies to the football. I think the 3.35 was good for him. I think it will be if they stick with that. That's the first one that came to mind for me. Did you have a name or two in mind? I can give you a couple more if you want. But
yeah, the 2 that immediately come to mind, the easy answer is it wouldn't surprise me if Dylan Stewart ends up on a freshman All SEC.
Oh, yeah, good point.
Team or whatever. But then if I'm going to stick on defense, TJ Sanders, it sounded like had a really good spring. I think he's, come into his own, is peaking heading into this offseason. He and Hemingway and really that whole rotation should wreak some havoc, and it won't surprise me if he piles up some stats enough to end up on the list as well.
You got an offensive name in mind? I was thinking maybe like Trovon Baugh at one of the guard spots. I thought he was pretty good last year. Same kind of deal as Kilgore, right? You get a full year in there. You're not going to be throwing it in September. I think this running game should be better with Rocket Sanders, especially. That's kind of a hard one to evaluate. You really got to watch guard play if you're going to, put someone on an All SEC team. But that maybe is one for offense.
Yeah, I mean, I think the pie in the sky one you would want to see at the end of the season is Nick Carver,
right?
Because I think that is your missing piece, and if he develops in to fill in that missing piece that Xavier Legette is vacating, not that he has to even be that level of good to make one of these teams, then your offense is probably pretty good. Especially, if you somehow ended up with Rocket Sanders and a receiver on one of these lists at the end of the year.
You feel really good about your offense in that case.
Yeah. And that would probably also put Lenore Sellers somewhere in the conversation if the offense is productive enough to have both. But I think we at this point in the offseason, we've talked a lot throughout it. We feel pretty good about the defense, and we have a lot of questions about the offense, particularly the passing game. Assuming Rocket Sanders gets back healthy, which everything I've heard is he's on track to be ready to go for the fall, at least you have that element to lean on that you didn't have last year while the rest of it comes along. But
yeah, no, I'm with you. I think that's probably about covers it. I think we threw in a few wild cards. I still think Kilgore is your most likely overall, though, if I maybe narrow it down to one.
I do think Kai Kroger, I think, let's see, what was he, 4th team? Hold on. Yeah, he was the 4th team All SEC. I think that he could end up higher than that. But
just last year of eligibility, he's going to need to do something big last game, whether that's Clemson or a bowl game, throw a touchdown.
Say a couple more perfect passing seasons.
Yeah, that would work. That would help. Maybe he can get drafted as a quarterback next year. He'll be draft eligible in 25.
All right. Well, we will have our preview for Alabama on next week's podcast. I'm also doing written previews for all these. I think I'm a little behind on the written previews compared to the podcast, so there'll be a written LSU preview in the coming days on GamecockScoop.com. Like I said, go check out the revamped look of the site. Support us, follow us on Instagram and Twitter and all the things at Rivals Gamecock. Subscribe here, and we'll see you next week.